Maria Theresa, the empress who fought half of Europe. The room is full of men waiting for her to fail. Not openly, no one says it out loud, but you can feel it anyway. In the polite smiles, in the careful pauses before anyone answers her, in the way maps sit across the table like pieces of a future already being divided. Because empires are supposed to pass from father to son. That's the rule. And rules like that survive for centuries because powerful men make sure they do. But now, the impossible has happened. Maria Theresa stands at the center of the Habsburg monarchy, young, pregnant, newly crowned, and half of Europe sees weakness. You feel it the moment her father, Charles VI, Holy Roman Emperor, dies. The atmosphere changes instantly. Not mourning, calculation. Because her father spent years trying to secure her inheritance through the Pragmatic Sanction of 1713, a promise from Europe's rulers that Maria Theresa would inherit peacefully. And for a while, everyone agrees, right up until the moment it actually matters. That's the thing about politics. Promises survive only as long as they remain convenient. And suddenly, convenience disappears. Prussia moves first, fast. You can almost hear the shock racing through Vienna as Frederick the Great invades Silesia. Not because Maria Theresa attacked him, not because negotiations failed, because he thinks she cannot stop him. And once one kingdom moves, others begin circling too. France, Bavaria, Spain, all watching the same thing, a young woman alone on a throne surrounded by enemies. And to them, she looks temporary. You feel it in the atmosphere of the court, advisors speaking carefully, nobles doubting quietly behind closed doors, foreign rulers already imagining how they'll divide the empire once she collapses. Because no one expects her to survive this. Not fully, not against this many enemies, and certainly not while carrying children, ruling an empire, and learning power in real time. But here's the mistake they make. They think softness means weakness. And Maria Theresa, she is not weak. You see it in the way she absorbs information, fast, constantly, like someone realizing she doesn't have time to become ready slowly. Because she doesn't. The war is already here. And what makes her dangerous isn't that she wants conflict, it's that she understands immediately what losing means. Not embarrassment, erasure, the destruction of her family's empire, the collapse of Habsburg power, the rewriting of Europe itself. So she does something extraordinary. She fights, not symbolically, not from a safe distance, completely. You see it in the famous moment she appears before the Hungarian nobles, young, desperate, holding her infant son, and instead of pretending strength, she tells them the truth, that she is abandoned, outnumbered, threatened from every side. And somehow, that honesty becomes power, because the room changes. The nobles who arrived uncertain suddenly see something different. Not a frightened woman, a ruler refusing to surrender. And one by one, swords rise, voices answer her. Loyalty transforms into something fierce. Because Maria Theresa does something many rulers never understand. She makes people believe the fight matters personally. Not just for her, for all of them. And suddenly, the woman half of Europe expected to collapse becomes the center of a war that will reshape the continent. You can feel it now. The shift, the realization spreading through Europe too late. This isn't going to be easy. Because Maria Theresa is not disappearing quietly. She's about to spend the next years fighting nearly every major power in Europe and surviving them. Right as Europe realizes the young empress they underestimated may become far more dangerous than any of them expected.
And once Europe realizes she won't collapse, the war changes. Because now, they actually have to fight her. Not the frightened young woman they imagined. Not the symbolic queen they assumed would surrender territory piece by piece. A ruler learning how to survive faster than her enemies can destroy her. You feel it in the speed of everything now. Messengers racing through rain and mud, maps changing weekly, armies moving before old battles are even finished.
because the War of the Austrian Succession becomes more than a succession crisis. It becomes a feeding frenzy. Every power in Europe sees opportunity, and opportunity, especially in politics, makes people ruthless. You see it in the pressure surrounding Maria Theresa constantly. She's expected to negotiate, expected to compromise, expected to hand over pieces of the empire just to keep what remains alive. And sometimes she has to. That's the painful part of power. Survival rarely looks glorious while it's happening. You see her making decisions she hates, signing agreements while knowing she's losing territory, listening to advisors argue over what parts of the empire can realistically be saved, watching powerful men debate her future like it belongs to them more than her. And through all of it, she keeps moving. That's what shocks people most, not that she wins every battle, because she doesn't, not that she always has the stronger army, because she rarely does. It's endurance, the refusal to break. You feel it in the rhythm of her life now: pregnancy, war councils, letters to generals, diplomatic negotiations, another child born, another invasion, another political betrayal, over and over again. And somehow, she keeps ruling through all of it. You can almost see Europe struggling to adjust to the reality of her, because rulers are easier to defeat when they fit expectations, and Maria Theresa refuses to stay inside theirs. She becomes sharper with every year of conflict, less uncertain, more dangerous, not because cruelty changes her, because pressure does. You see it in the way she rebuilds loyalty around herself, not through spectacle, not through fear alone, through presence. People believe she is fighting for the empire, not simply sitting above it. And that creates something powerful, because soldiers will fight harder for rulers who appear willing to suffer alongside them. Maria Theresa understands that instinctively. You feel it especially in Vienna, the city tense but alive, nobles anxious, military officers exhausted. Yet somehow the empire continues functioning because she refuses to let it collapse emotionally. And then there's Frederick the Great, the rival who never fully leaves the story, because losing Silesia burns inside her constantly, not only as territory, as insult. Frederick took advantage of what the world assumed about her, and even years later, she never forgets it. That's what makes their rivalry feel personal, not dramatic hatred, recognition. Each understands the other is far more formidable than Europe first believed. And somewhere inside all the war, diplomacy and survival, Maria Theresa transforms, not into a conqueror, into something harder to destroy. A ruler forged under pressure instead of protected from it. Because by now, she no longer looks like the uncertain young empress surrounded by enemies. She looks like someone who has survived them. And Europe begins realizing something uncomfortable. The woman they expected to erase from power may become one of the strongest rulers of the century. Not because she conquered half of Europe, because she endured half of Europe trying to conquer her. Right as survival begins turning into true authority. Because next, Maria Theresa stops merely defending her empire and begins reshaping it entirely. And once survival becomes normal, something changes inside a ruler. The panic fades first, then the hesitation, and eventually, the person who once fought just to keep the empire alive begins asking a different question. What should this empire become now? That's where Maria Theresa becomes truly dangerous. Not during the invasions, not during the desperate speeches, after. Because now she understands power differently than the rulers who inherited stability. She knows how fragile empires actually are, how quickly promises collapse, how fast allies disappear, how dangerous weak leadership becomes when enemies smell opportunity. And once she learns those lessons, she never forgets them. You see it in the way she begins rebuilding the Habsburg monarchy from the inside. Not flashy reforms, not theatrical declarations, structural change. The kind rulers usually avoid because it angers powerful people. But Maria Theresa no longer rules like someone afraid of powerful people. She centralizes authority, strengthens administration, pushes reforms into systems that had survived on tradition for centuries. And naturally, people resist, because every reform creates enemies, especially inside old empires. You feel it in the tension surrounding her court now. Nobles frustrated by lost privileges, officials angry about oversight, traditional elites watching their influence slowly shrink. But Maria Theresa keeps pushing, because ruling through war taught her something brutal. An empire held together loosely eventually falls apart completely. So she tightens everything: taxes, military organization, education, state control, and beneath all of it, a single obsession: never becoming vulnerable again. You can see it most clearly in how she approaches family. Because for Maria Theresa, family is not separate from politics. It is politics. Children become alliances. Marriages become strategy. Relationships become extensions of imperial survival. And no child matters more politically than Marie Antoinette. You feel the weight of that decision long before history remembers it. A daughter sent toward France not simply to marry, but to stabilize Europe itself. Because Maria Theresa understands something deeply by now: wars are expensive. Marriage can sometimes accomplish what armies cannot, at least temporarily. So while Europe sees elegant royal weddings, Maria Theresa sees diplomacy, insurance, survival. And yet, even as she reshapes the empire, expands influence, and strengthens her dynasty, you still feel the cost of the life she built. Because rulers who survive constant pressure rarely become softer afterward. They become controlled, disciplined, demanding, unable to fully relax because they remember too clearly what collapse almost looked like. You see it in the atmosphere around her late in life. Not fear like Anna of Russia, something different: intensity. Everything organized, everything purposeful, everything carrying the weight of responsibility. Because Maria Theresa never stops ruling emotionally. She carries the empire constantly, in meetings, in family decisions, in diplomacy, in religion, in reform. And perhaps that's what makes her remarkable. Not perfection, not conquest. Endurance transformed into leadership. Because the young woman Europe expected to destroy quietly ends up reshaping the continent anyway. Not by becoming the most ruthless ruler, not by conquering everyone around her, but by surviving long enough to force Europe to respect her. And respect, hard-earned respect, often lasts longer than fear ever does. You can feel it by the end of her reign. The atmosphere has changed completely. No one speaks about Maria Theresa like a temporary ruler anymore. She becomes the center of European politics itself. A woman who entered power surrounded by men waiting for failure, and left it as one of the most powerful monarchs of the age. So we leave her here, not during the wars, not during the invasions, but after the survival. Because that's where her true strength finally reveals itself. Not in resisting collapse, but in rebuilding an empire strong enough to outlive the people who tried to tear it apart. If this story stayed with you, if you felt what it means to survive pressure until it becomes power, don't stop here. There are more women like her. Women who weren't supposed to hold empires together, and did it anyway. Subscribe and come back for the next chapter. Next time, we step into a woman whose beauty made her famous, but whose intelligence made her dangerous. Stay dangerous, stay loud, and never let them hold the pen.